Welcome to Being Human. This week, my guest is Jan Åke Johnsson. He's the author of Evolution in Reverse, Demystifying My Epilepsy, Forget Everything You Know About Therapy. We know each other as both having been patients at the Primal Center in Los Angeles, both having worked on difficult birth experiences. So I'm delighted to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Right. And just before we came on air, we talked about whether the title of your book, and whether it was really about you having solved your epilepsy or cured your epilepsy. And you hesitate to say that you've done that. But it's true to say, right, you now have a completely different relationship to your epilepsy than when you started on your journey, right?
Totally, yes. I would say I achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Okay.
And the fantastic thing, I could throw away my medication, and I've been able to live a very normal life.
Right.
Normal in quotes, because I have never been normal.
Okay, yes. And of course, what's extraordinary about this story is that many people see epilepsy as something they simply have to learn to live with, right? Through various techniques and through medication and so on. But your story is one of having overcome it and have a completely different relationship to it, right?
Yeah, that's true. I would say, though, the reason for my epilepsy will always be there. So in one way or the other, I will always have some primals coming up now and then.
Okay, well, let's start with that then. So primals coming up, that's going to be unfamiliar terminology for some people listening to this. So,
right.
So should we start with that then? What do we mean by a primal, and what role has it played in your healing from epilepsy? Or
well, let's go 40 years back in time. I was 40 when I went to Janov the first time, more or less.
And when you say Janov, and sorry again, for people who are completely new to this, you're talking about Arthur Janov.
Arthur Janov, yes.
Yeah, Primal Scream.
At the Primal Institute in Beverly Hills. And the same time I went into Rolfing. Actually recommended by people in the Primal Institute, by his wife, Vivian. I went up to Boulder. I had a job in Boulder at the same time. And Boulder was the center for a lot of gurus during the 70s and 80s. And among others, Ida Rolf had her center in Boulder for many years. So I went up there during my time in the Primal Institute and went through a very rough session. Let's say I had been in primal therapy for 2 years. And when I went back home to Sweden in January 1980, what happened then, one evening when I went to bed, suddenly I came home from the sunny LA. I came back home to Sweden in January, when it's normally winter, darkness falls so hard. And I came from the sunny side of life in California, and I got a little depressed. And one evening I went into bed and I thought I was going to have an epileptic seizure. And for the first time, it never became an epilepsy. It became a terrible feeling when I like a small baby couldn't get out. I couldn't get out. I couldn't breathe. I was kind of choking, and that was my first primal. It lasted for a couple of hours. I mean, it's very hard to describe it because there's no word when it happens. It's just a feeling. You say you're in a different world. Your moved back more than 40 years in time. But at the same time, when I came out of that, it was an incredible relief. I suddenly knew that what my epilepsy was.
Right.
And after that, I went to quite a few retreats we had in Europe together with Art and the Primal Institute. I think we had 5, 6 during the 80s. And every time Art Janov loved to bring me into my primers, which was kind of a entertainment session for the whole group. and I could just enjoy it. And terrible things happened. One of these meetings I came out of with imprints all over my head, blue and black, because they had tried to suck me out with a what do you call it? What do you call that in English? A tongue.
A forceps.
Forceps. With an instrument. Yeah, suck me out, and the imprints come out all over my head, and like that. But during all the 80s and 5 years into the 90s, 15 years, I was in my career. So once in a while, I went to a retreat and went through this, back to my medication, and it turned out that I felt better and better, and my career went extremely well. I get more job than I really should have taken on, but suddenly I took a job which was too big. It was in the beginning of the 90s when all Europe was in big crisis, and I get a feeling that either I die or I stop working. So 95, I decided to go into some treatment and stop working, and I threw away my medication, and day and night for 2 years I went through epileptic primals. Epilepsies were turned into primals. It was 2 terrible years because I threw my medication and I couldn't really handle. I couldn't get into the primals as quickly as needed. So sometimes it turned into a seizure because I had thrown away all medications.
Right.
But let's say over a couple of years, I didn't need the medication. It was all primals.
Wow. So
it changed my life. I mean, I turned into a different person in a way. I get more sensitive. I no doubt for 40 years I had extreme help of my strong epileptic medication. Even if I was not, I wouldn't say I was an extremely insensitive person. It did help me through a lot of stress, this medication. And when I threw away that, it's like I had to face new challenges.
Okay, so let me just make some sense of what you've just described. Then, so you've been on medication for 40 years, and you started this epileptic.
Yeah, from I was 20 until I was 55, 35 years.
So from when you're 20 till you're 55, you're on this epileptic medication. When you're 40, you go out to California.
Yeah.
And you experience primal therapy.
Yeah, and I took I didn't throw away my medication at that time. I still used my medication.
So 15 years prior to this point, you're still on your medication. You've gone out to partake in primal therapy, in which you start to re-presence your birth experience, and you start to have what you just describing as primal epilepsy or primal seizures, right? So where you'll have something like the epileptic seizure, the seizure that you were having before, but the consciousness is different.
Yeah, and
right?
I wasn't scared of epilepsy anymore because I knew that my epilepsy was birth pain.
Yeah.
So it was just a question of being patient enough and to get used to letting the feelings come up. It's easy to say get into a primal, but I tell you, it's a piece of art to sick piece of art to get into a primal, and you have to wait for the moment. And when art has an extremely good expression for going into a female, he says, just lie back and feel the stab of the pain.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
that you have to take that moment. And I lived in a way, so I had a very protected house, and I could go down in my basement and scream and do whatever I wanted because I didn't scare anyone. And they knew. My family get used to it. My wife got used to it. She even filmed me.
Right. And this is when you first started doing it in your early 40s? Or is this later?
No, I'm talking about 95, when I'm getting really decided to just not only do it in retreats, but do it full time.
Okay, so for 15 years, just because I really want to give the audience a sense of this journey here.
I can say that for me, it's yeah, no, I agree. I understand you.
So you're dipping into this, right? You're kind of getting some experiences of this primal. You're starting to build a different relationship with your epilepsy, but you're still on your medication. You're still working.
I still didn't have the, let's say, the economic stability. So I needed to work. I had families to take care of, and I had a extremely fun life. And I didn't want, I knew already in 1980 that one day I have to stop working and full-time get into the primal.
Okay.
So if that's the same situation, I would say 95% of primal people have. They don't really dare to get full-time into there. And they don't have the time, they don't have the possibility. It's a social, psychological, cultural adventure.
Right.
You really need to go your own way.
Right. So, but you certainly you're starting to develop this different relationship. You're allowing yourself to have what we both know as primal experiences, where you're represencing this historic pain, but you're keeping the rest of your life going until you hit a point. 15 years.
Where I say either I die or I go into primal.
And at this age, you're 55, and you're like, okay, at this point, I've got to go full into this. I can't.
Yeah, and I need to tell you another story there. When I was 54, I remarried for the third time and got a daughter. And I decided I want to live and follow her and give her a better life than I had done to my first family. So that was kind of my motivation. That was my deep motivation for doing this.
Right. And you'd seen enough evidence from the work you'd done that this was something that was going to seriously help.
I tell you, she is a primal child, and she is more. She has a lot of the same temperament than I was, a personality I have myself. But she has been sane all the time, and she has been listened to, and she has been taken care of in a way. So. She even met Art. We went down to France and to Saint-Tropez and met him in France a few years ago before he died.
Right, and this again for the listeners, this is Arthur Janov.
Arthur Janov, yes.
Who created Primal Therapy, and his wife, France, who's still alive.
Yeah. They had their summer house in Saint-Tropez, so that's close to Spain.
Yeah, where you spend a lot of time, right?
In Spain, yeah, I live in Spain. I pay taxes in Spain, so I ought to be considered as a Spanish citizen almost.
Right. Okay. So I get that. So at 54,
But my heart is Swedish. My heart is Swedish.
Okay. And 54, you've got a daughter, and it reaches 55, and either you do this or you die, right? So you throw the medication, and what, you give up work?
Totally. I mean, I those 2-3 years, I did nothing else than take care of of my
Right.
crazy birth for 2-3 years. It was, I will tell you, I went through hell. I would prefer, if I should do it again, to go through hell than to go through this experience over 2-3 years. But having done it, I would say I don't regret it. That's the best thing I ever did. But I wouldn't believe it's possible to do it. But it was.
Right.
It was. We are stronger than we think.
And so give people a taste of this daily regime then for 2 years. Well,
yeah, I did. You say I changed many things. I changed my diet. I changed the way I lived. I could spend many hours a day with this. The same time I went into homeopathy. Homeopathy. What do you say in English? Homeopathy. Yeah. And at the same time, I went through a clean out of infections I had been carrying my life, and that almost killed me as well. So I got shingles for 4 months. I was more or less, I would say, almost dead for 4 months when I went through that, and my whole body was bubbling of viruses which went out of my body. And it worked extremely well together with my primal experiences. So I was weak, and I had no defenses. I mean, things just bubbled out of me. The birth. I would say I had a fairly normal life as a child. I had a mother who loved me from I was born till she died when I was 65. So I didn't have a lot of terrible experience as a child, more than my birth, and that was enough. So I could go straight to the source of my pain. So I had a father who didn't like me very much, and that in the beginning that put a brake on what happened. Not very much, really. He liked me, but he had his problems, so he didn't dare to show who he was. It was more that was a problem than that he molested me. He didn't.
Right. And I think this is something that's not, sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I grew up in a extremely nice environment. Nice and crazy. I grew up in a university. I mean, I would say well-educated, nice, well-behaving people. We had good economy. Everything was well arranged for us. And the problem is that that was when we first discovered I was not normal because of my birth. These days I had surely been given medication for ADHD. ADHD. And I couldn't stand my high school. I went out. I had a 4 or 5 years when I really lived a wild life. When I between 16 and 20, before I developed epilepsy. I was on my way into the theater to be an artist. But I developed epilepsy the same month I was going to start my theater school. So that changed my life totally. And during 7, 8 following years, when I get the epileptic medication, I could finish my high school, university, and get a business management degree.
Right. So it was this medication that really...
Yeah, that saved my life. Saved my life. It's extremely important to mention. I mean, I don't like a lot of what the pharmaceutical industry is doing, but they saved my life, no doubt.
Right. And that flip between when so you said you had wild teens, it sounds like 15 until 20, but then you get this then you start to get epilepsy and some of the wildness dissipates. I mean, how does that?
Totally, overnight from the moment I got the epileptic medication, I realized I don't want to continue what I'm doing. I tried everything. You name it, and I'm sure I've been through it. And then I suddenly decided I want to leave Sweden. So I went 2 years to Copenhagen. I worked as not as a journalist, but as a correspondent. I worked for a hat company, Stetson. So that was my first contact with the United States.
Right.
And when these 2 years in Copenhagen, because when I grew up as a small child, I lived together with Danish people. So I had a dual language. I was Danish for me. Danish is an ugly, difficult language, but I learned it as a 2-3-year-old. So when I come to Copenhagen as 20 years old, took me 2 months and I speak Danish, which the Danes think I'm Danish, but I'm not, I'm Swedish. But okay, living in Copenhagen, I found out I think I can't work the rest of my life being smarter than my bosses. I need to get education so I can take their job. And I did. Took me 5-6 years to work, to study enough to be able to get the work. And in 2-3 years, I made a quick career and was on my way.
Right.
And 74, I read the Primal Scream, and then I decided within 5 years I'm going to LA, and that's how it all worked out.
Right, but there was reading your book. There was a precursor to you reading Primal Scream, right? You did a test, an evaluation test that looked at your self-awareness, right? And where did that play in terms of when you first started to become aware of you might want to look beyond your medication in terms of addressing your epilepsy?
I'm not sure I understand.
So was there anything that happened before reading the Primal Scream book?
You see, the fantastic thing with my Primal Scream reading was that I met a man in Copenhagen. His name was Möller Anderson, and he was a friend of Ortiz, the guy in New York who was the first man to discover primal therapy, the primal experiences, which later Art Janov picked up. So I knew the guy who made the first primal happen to Art Janov. So my friend was the friend of Ortiz. So I have been through these things for so many years. So and he told me, he said, I said, I have some problems in my life, etc. Well, so, no problem. Read Primal Scream, he said, and you can go to LA and they fix it for you.
Right.
So I would say it was just by luck. I met this guy, and he convinced me and gave me an advice to read the Primal Scream, and I did it. And the same day I read the book in 3-4 hours. I decided this is it. I'm going to LA. And yeah, that's how it started.
Right. So it was a friend of yours who knew Ortiz, and it may be useful for the listeners. So just describe what happened with Ortiz. So he kicked this. He was a performance artist.
Ortiz was the guy who destroyed grand pianos in New York in the 60s, 70s. And he still does. He's still alive. He's still alive. It's fantastic. And one guy from LA came to New York. Danny was his name. And when he made a provocative session, this Rafael Ortiz, Danny threw himself on the floor in a tantrum and had what we would call today a kind of a primal. If it was an abreaction or a real primal, we will never know. But then he went to LA, and Art met him, and he talked to Art about what had happened to him in New York, and Art said, do it again, and he provoked him, and the first primal was born. And 1 year later, Art wrote the Primal Scream and made his fortune. He sold more than 1 million. And so he became an economic independent, which is the secret about Art Janov. He became an independent. He didn't need to listen to any other therapist. He could leave all of them, work all on his own. And that's the greatness of Art Janov. He became independent and could do whatever suited him.
Right. So his genius was allowed to flourish. You know,
to fly. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting, because I realized if I worked enough so I could make myself independent economically, I could behave a way where I could let my primals fly. That's why I see most people who succeed in primal therapy have this safety net around them, which allow them to be themselves. They're not depending on families, they're not depending on money or people around them. They can follow their own mind, which I think is extremely important. And I think, if I'm not totally wrong, I think you have the same background yourself.
Yeah. So my experience with primal therapy is I think we've done it slightly differently, in the sense that I've done it more continuously.
Yeah.
But my experience has been absolutely that it's just as sort of debilitating, right? I mean, if I re-experience or re-presence my highly traumatic birth experience, I feel that stab of pain acutely, and I can spend hours, sometimes days, sobbing and gurgling and thrashing around and allowing all of what my body needs to do in order to process.
Or what your body can allow you to do, because there is a limit when you get so exhausted you need to put the brake on it.
Right, exactly. So I've been in a position where I've been able to spend periods working part-time or having breaks between contracts. But yeah, my particular economic position, where I've been able to access a contract market where I can spend a short period of time making a relatively large amount of money and then not work for a bit, or be in a position where I can work part-time but still earn enough.
Which I think is extremely important if you want to be successful in primal therapy.
Yeah, and that has allowed, because I think there's a certain falling apart which comes with entering this process, which is why so few take this path, right? Because I think intuitively people know that once they open, in fact, you reference Pandora's box in your book, but once you open that box, all the demons are going to be released, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is, it takes some time as well to accept that you are living in a crazy world. So you have a lot of crazy people around you. But after a couple of years, you accept that. We are not the same, all of us. But I mean, in the beginning, you are so extremely primal oriented, so you don't think you can be able to live with crazy people. But you can, in a certain way. If I don't decide how you are going to live.
Yeah, I suppose in my experience hasn't been that I've sort of identified the people around me as being crazy.
No,
just maybe highly skeptical of this path, right?
Yeah. I tell you something. I say the same thing as Art always said. No one has ever asked me about primal therapy, how it works. No one. Yeah. And Art said that.
Yeah. And there's a reason why people would not, it's completely logical to me that somebody
to me too. But I mean, it's interesting. That's the evidence of how difficult it is.
Right, exactly. And I think this is a facility that us as human beings have, but it seems to me that there's been very little time for very few individuals in human history would they have had the space to invest in this kind of work, right, on themselves. Yeah.
But I would say something which might surprise you. I think neurosis and repressions, that's one of the secrets of the standard we have, that things work. I mean, if Steve Jobs hadn't been neurotic, we wouldn't have the iPhone. I mean, and whatever. I mean, to make this kind of crazy things, you need to have some neurotic energy. So neurotic energy is part of life.
Right.
That's what I've come to, and it doesn't scare me at all. But the problem is when there's too much or too little of everything. I mean, that's when things start to go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose the intuition I had that my neuroses, to use that word, were getting out of hand and were becoming destructive for my life. And
yeah, but I mean, I had a certain amount of neurosis is good for you.
Right. Yeah.
You can't just lie back and you need to have some ambition.
Right. Exactly. Those drives. And I suppose for people listening, they may hear the word neurotic and they may think about, I don't know,
it's a difficult word. It's a difficult
word. Right. The risk of being sexist, maybe an hysterical woman or something, or a nervous person, neurotic person, and an anxious person. But here we're using the term neurotic slightly differently. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think when something happens to you which is more painful than you can handle, that's when well, how should I express it? That's when your organism is putting repression on you, so you don't feel the pain, but the pain is still there. But the pain is not only negative; it's working in a constructive way, giving you energy to compensate for the pain, and that's what I call for neurosis, because then you often do things which are not the true, the sole reason for your pure needs. When you're doing more than your pure needs, that's when you're acting in a neurotic way. When you're never satisfied. When you never really got enough. When your system doesn't really feel when you got enough. That's the difference now. When I can laugh at myself because I have been extremely neurotic. And sometimes I say, hey, what I'm doing, I'm falling into my old trap of being limitless. And I can laugh and lay back and say, hey, that was then. That's the difference. As of and did for 55.
I know I had the same sense that there's something that isn't right about some of my drives. I mean, I've had a neurosis in terms of substance abuse, sexuality. That those were the areas that were king for me. And at some level, I knew that a lot of this behavior wasn't right. But yeah, you're right. You're on train tracks. There's this compulsion. There's in your heart that this isn't right. But
I mean, for between 1980 or 1955, I mean, I didn't work 8-hour days. I worked 16-hour days all the time. I never took any holidays. I mean, I woke up 6 o'clock in the morning and wanted to go to the job. So people didn't say anything, but I understood. They thought I was crazy, and I was in a way. So.
Right.
But I mean, many people loved you because things got done. And,
right. Yeah.
They could always trust that when they sent me into a big different project, I didn't give up until it was done.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand then that it was the cost of my health.
Right. And that's right. And then what's interesting in society is those neurotic drives that result in very high productivity are celebrated, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, very much so, especially in the American system.
Yeah. So another reason, and that was something that I had to adjust to in terms of my ego, was, and still wrestle with sometimes, right? To choose this path of opening up Pandora's box, going into my pain, allowing myself to fall apart, my ego really resists that because it wants to, because it wants me to be productive and celebrated in the world,
and get the applause, and get the applauses for being clever and being productive.
Exactly. And not a kind of dribbling mess on the floor. But then there's another part of me that knows I need to be that wreck, that mess to heal.
And it's interesting because I never worked for money. I worked for appraisal. Money wasn't an appraisal for me. I would say I earned too little money in my life, really. I'm not going to call it, sorry about it, but I was depending on what people thought about me. I wanted them to think I was clever and I was smart and I could do things others couldn't do. That was what I was working for. If I'd been less neurotic and instead worked for money, I think I could have stopped working earlier.
Right.
Can you follow me?
Yeah. No, I see that. Yeah. But finally, you get, just to come back to your story. So you get to 55. Finally, you just say, "Okay, I am going to let go. I'm going to give up the job. I'm going to allow myself to just go into this." You spend 2 years. So every day you're allowing yourself to go into these primal experiences.
Yeah, and I would say 2 years, extreme years. But then I would say up till around, I was about 65. It took that time to come back slowly, to find a new rhythm in my life, to sleep as a normal person, to read as a normal person, to stay at home, to take care of my daughter, to start playing golf, and to like doing things other people normally did. Looking at a new car, buying a new car. I mean, I didn't give a damn about this thing when I was in my career, and doing normal things. And when I was close to 70, I decided to write my story. And 5 years later, I was 75. I say, I need some new challenge. I never done anything with music in my whole life. I need to understand what a note is. So I at least can understand the sing do re mi fa sol la si la so, and I started taking music lessons and started playing the tenor sax when I was 75. I thought I was crazy, but I was too old to do that. No, and I found a teacher who liked what I did, so we became friends. A young guy, he's certainly the most sane person I ever met in my life. So we're having a great time. So I'm on my 4th year now with the sax. So now I can start playing jazz, at least help. So I can hear myself what it is. I can't play in an orchestra because there are not people around me who is playing, and the young people don't want to play with a guy who's 80.
Well, who knows? You've got at least one.
No. Well, they can do it if they're polite. That's not the question. I mean, I can. It would have been nice if you had a gang of crazy guys, 75, 80, who made a.
Well, maybe that's your next project.
Yeah. And I tell you, it's working that way because I met a couple of guys who also decided to start. So let's see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, now I got prostata, but let's see what. They are clever, so maybe they can cut it out.
Right. So you right, and we spoke a few days ago, and you said you were going into hospital to.
Yeah. They found out I need to be treated. So let's see. I'm in the middle of a process now. They're going up to take cell samples next week, and let's say if I might have to go through an operation during the summer.
Okay, well, I hope...
It's funny, because all my vital signs has been excellent. So I believed Art too much. He said, if you have vital signs are good, you won't risk anything. But I tell you, I have excellent signs, both in blood pressure, the level of blood sugar and pulse and everything, but doesn't help. Maybe I have got prostata cancer in spite of that.
Right, but that's extremely common, right? I mean,
yeah, it is.
For men of your age.
I'm fucking too little, because when I was young, I could change wife every second year. And
right.
Those days are gone.
Right.
So are my hormones.
Right.
That's why I play the tenor sax instead.
Yeah. Well, some people say it's better than sex.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never played.
Well, I don't know. I have nothing against. I had nothing against sex. It was part of the best thing you had.
Right. Okay. So to go back to this recovery, so 10 years. I mean, that's a long time. That sounds like a long time, doesn't it? So 2 years you're doing this extreme work, and then and you're doing this all by yourself, or are you using therapists during this period?
No, no, I didn't. I was a lucky guy, because I started early to communicate with Art, and Art and I have been in contact over all the years. So I emailed with Art during these years, and continued to do until he died. So, and I was always on his blogs as well. But he helped me a lot, and it didn't cost me a cent. He did everything for free. He loved me. He liked me very much, and he used me when he wrote his books. I've been writing quite a few pieces in his books.
Right.
So we understood each other very well.
So you had correspondence with Arthur Janov, the originator of...
Yeah, we met during the retreats, and we became friends. He always called me his pal, and I think I was kind of his pal. Right.
And so just describe for people, what is this process you go through then? So you're not doing this with a therapist, you're doing this on your own. How does this happen? You know, what's the thought process?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I met Art Janov in the retreats. And normally when I was on the verge of going into a primal, he always said, go with it, Jan, go with it, Jan. And when I was by myself over these years, every time I went into it, I could hear Art Janov say, go with it, Jan. He was in the room in an imaginary way. So, and afterwards I could, in the morning, quickly write him an email, and he answered normally within 5 minutes. Short comment, always immediately, and short comments, what he thought about it.
Okay.
And he was the guy who said to me, you need to write about this.
Mm. And when you hear his voice saying "go with it," what exactly, blow by blow for people? Because
then I had the same feeling I had in the retreats. I felt 100% safe. I just let go.
And when you let go, what happens? So,
it could start with, I get a numb feeling from my mouth, my teeth, up over my head, and suddenly it could go down into my respiratory, and my tongue could fall into my throat, and I could suddenly, I could get the feeling I was choked and I was dying, and suddenly I said, oh, and I let go. I said, okay, I'm dying, and suddenly I could, within minutes or maybe half an hour, I could wake up and feel better than ever. That's about the process.
Yeah.
Could take 1 to 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, but it was this kind of process. It's always started with me getting in to a pressure in my mouth. My nose being squeezed. I've been strangled. My tongue falling into and even the feeling of being anesthetized by different medias.
Right.
So that's how it worked.
And is there a trigger to this, or do you just kind of sit on your couch or your bed and think, right, okay, I'm ready to have a primal? I mean, what's
No. That's another good point. It normally happens when I go to bed and have slept 1 to 1.5 hours. When I just the same moment I go into my REM sleep, that's when it happens.
Okay.
So it's very closely connected to my REM sleep. It is still. I mean, every time I have never, all my epilepsy and everything I've had in my life has been connected to my REM sleep. So the same with my primals. They are extremely connected to my REM sleep.
Right.
So,
and even when you started to experience epilepsy right back in your teens, this would happen at night.
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah. It has a couple of times it's happened during the night time, but then normally after I've been inducing something,
okay,
or exhausted myself. I've had a few times when I was young when these things happened, but I was then in a state which was very close to what REM sleep was, in a way. I should really have been sleeping. It's like the body did it its own way.
Okay.
Can you follow me?
Yeah. So it's a kind of a waking sleep.
Exactly.
Okay. And the big difference is, and you don't say you're cured, but the big difference is now versus when you had those seizures in the past was now you're fully you're consciously aware of what's happening to you, and you could stop it at any moment, whereas previously it had you.
Yeah, it had me until I woke up from unconsciousness.
Right. Okay.
So it's.
And so now, what do you, looking back now, how do you view those seizures? How do you see them now?
Yeah. I think I in relation to other epileptics, I'm glad I used the title demystifying my epilepsy, because epilepsy is still there. The reason for the epilepsy is still there. It's my birth primal. But if I can't handle my birth primal, it turns into an epileptic seizure. Can you follow me?
Yeah.
So I can say I'm cured, but it's not fair to other people who have epilepsy to say that, because to cure your epilepsy, you need to have access to your feelings. And I mean, how in hell can people get access to their feelings if they happen during birth? I mean, very, very, very few people can do that. You have to be extremely lucky or to enter into circumstances where luck plays a bigger role than you believe.
Right. Yeah. No.
Going into Rolfing and Primal Therapy at the same time was my luck, because the treatment in the Rolfing was that with the deep tissue massage, which Ida Rolf developed, she could take away the defenses which over the years had developed in my body, and they took away too much of that. I could get into seizures, but then suddenly, when I understood what Janov was saying, I could turn them into feelings. So there's this connection. Can you follow me?
Yeah, and we've actually had a Rolfer on the show as a previous episode. Yeah, and I think that's I know, I can understand that. And I've had my own experience of Rolfing. In fact, it was you that, amongst a few others, but really turned me on to Rolfing as a complement to doing
and
the
that's the sad thing in my connection with Janov and Ida Rolf is that they couldn't work together. They couldn't stand each other, and because that's the I would say that's the failing link in primal therapy, because both of them are natural and healthy treatments, and they but on different ends of the same problem.
Right. And
Art has trade Rolfing, by the way, in SLM, but he wasn't, apparently he had a bad Rolfer.
And this is the Esalen Institute in California where you can do Rolfing.
Yeah, that's where Ida Rolf started.
Right.
Most of the therapy started up in SLM. So.
Yeah. Yes, and so my experience is, through primal therapy, I can start to break down my defenses through a conversation, a dialogue with a therapist, or over time, kind of with myself. But then with Rolfing, it's through the body.
An interesting thing. Sometimes when you go to a Rolf and they treat you, suddenly you can feel things coming up, memories. I remember one time it was just a crazy thing. I came into his room and say, "Why do you wear your hat a little on what do you call it? Not straight."
Oh, you might say tilted, yeah, on the
yeah, a little tilted. And he started treating me, and suddenly I memory came up because I started to wear a hat when I was 18, and people think I was cocky, and I was cocky. And I decided I'm going to be cocky. That's when suddenly I say, because that was my defense. I was insecure and scared to death what people were thinking about me. But if I did things a little extreme, they was irritated, but in a positive way.
Right.
So gosh, came up these memories of me being cocky. And why was it? And it was the defense. And a lot of these things came up during Rolfing, small things which built on my because the reason for the consequences of my birth and the pain I had made me what do you call it? Overactive.
Mm.
And that brought me into a lot of trouble because people couldn't stand my extreme energy.
Right, and as you say, you may have been diagnosed as ADHD today.
Yeah. Fortunately, they didn't give me a lot of medication to that, because that would have killed me.
Right.
Like they're killing a lot of other children today. Because people, the parents don't have the time to take care of them. It's normal that you have some certain.
Yeah, it's well, I suppose, I mean, that's just a theme more broadly in society, isn't it? Is that people having time and space to deal with their mental health issues. It requires enormous investment. I mean, that's been my experience of taking this path. It's an enormous investment. Hours, thousands of hours. In my case, dollars. I mean, I know you've done a lot of it, by yourself. It's and that's true of adults. That's true of kids. It's we have this facility within us to heal, but it's not without investment. Yeah, and so one thing that we have in common is this birth experience, and I am generally meted with a great deal of skepticism whenever I talk about the fact that I had this difficult birth and it's had this major impact on my life. I read in the book, I thought it was interesting. You watched a show in Sweden. Sorry, go on. You say.
Yeah, no, I would say an interesting thing which happened to me, which is worth mentioning, is when I came back from LA, 1980, I sat down with my mother, and she had for 20 years said, "Yeah, your epilepsy is not my fault." And then suddenly we sat down in January 1980, and she started to crying and told me, suddenly she had, I would say, almost a primal, and told me everything about my birth process. how terrible it had been. We had almost going to die, both of us. And she said, "Why did you do it?" I said, "Well," I said, she had read in the Bible that she was religious, that she should give birth with pain. And she did everything she could to make my birth process painful. I talk to a lot of people. I have friends who are what do you call it, are doctors helping people giving birth, etc. Is it possible? Can a woman do that? Not really, they say, but if she has decided, I mean, she can certainly, if there's a problem in the birth process, she can certainly make it worse. And she did. And I tell you something, that experience with my mother was worth as much as my first experience with turning an epileptic thing into a primal. The way she left out herself and told me about the birth process, which lasted for 48 hours. And we were a totally different person, my mother and I. She extremely calm. If she decided not to do a thing, I mean, she could certainly avoid doing it. And if she decided not to give birth quickly, it certainly happened that way. And she was aware of that. My three siblings, which came after me, were born within 20 minutes, all of them. She took all the time with me. But on the other hand, it made her very, she gave me a special treatment for the rest of her life. I mean, wherever I was in my life, in the world, I always called my mother and talk to her. Not because I needed her, but I knew she needed more than I needed her. So it was a reciprocal contact. I mean, I got really the best out of her, and she the best out of me, because I loved her and I knew she loved me. So yeah. That's and that doesn't really fit when you talk to primal people. For most of them are angry with their mothers or fathers.
Right, and yeah, I mean,
but I loved my mother, and in spite of she was the reason for my primal problem. It's an interesting thing. It's so contradictory. So you can't write about it.
Yeah, and what I found in that process, I have to separate the two. I have to separate the woman in front of me now and the mother I experienced at whatever point I'm working on in my past. And they're two different beings. I can have compassion.
That's certainly almost a schizophrenic process.
Right.
But finally, it falls into place, and you can live with both of them.
Yeah.
But that's a process, a difficult process in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's possible because one of them is a right brain and the other is a left brain thing.
Yeah, that might be true. Yeah. That ability to suppress feelings when we need to.
Yeah, exactly.
In order to interact.
The other is to understand and reason.
Yeah.
And make these two go together. That's the problem.
Right. And that's why highly rational, sort of shut down individuals can actually be very.
No, you can read a chapter about that, but that doesn't make you very much wiser. You have to go through it over years to really assimilate the subtleties of that process.
Yeah. But coming back to the birth experience, which you and I share, are difficult. I mean, yours was 48 hours, mine was 24 hours. But I was pulled out with forceps. I wasn't pulled out with a cut, but I almost nearly died as well. And so we had there's a lot of similarity there. And I had a relatively nurturing childhood, right? I mean, yeah, there were some issues with my childhood, but the most of my pain was contained in my birth experience, not in my in the childhood. And what struck me in the book is you talked about writing a letter to the host of a TV show in Sweden And there's this guy Lasse Stromstedt.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because
and he says something similar. He says, well, actually my childhood was okay, but I had this really difficult birth experience, and I attribute that experience to some of the criminality that I engaged in my youth. So tell us a little bit about that in the letter you wrote.
Well, no, I mean, it brought really up. I was furious when I saw the program. And I for many years, I liked this, Lasse Holmqvist was the name of the host. I liked him for many years. When he said these things, he really stepped on me. And I so furious, I wrote this letter to him.
And he mocked this guy who'd attributed.
Yeah, he did. And this guy, I mean, he suffered all his life. He had a terrible, lousy life, criminal, and he did all the crazy things you could do. Because he didn't know why, but he had a feeling when they what do you call it, the cord was around his umbilical cord, so he came out blue in the head, or if I don't remember wrong. I haven't read that for many years now, but it's interesting that you have read that. Yeah,
but what I like in the letter, and you cited research that suggests that those with an adverse birth experience are more susceptible to criminality. And and I've read other studies about how a difficult birth can lead to crime and suicide. And so there's a great deal of research that suggests that.
I would say most of the people sitting in prison has been through something like that in their life.
Right. But there's certainly a link. And I think that it's almost as if we're at a place in society where people can kind of accept that childhood experiences can affect the adult personality or adult behaviors, but it seems to be a step too far for a lot of people to say, it goes back before that, right?
Because you can't. These things you can't discuss with them. I mean, you will never be able to put the judicial evidence on the table, and if you can't do that, our society is not prepared to accept it.
But you can. I mean, but interestingly, in this case, there is some research that exists.
Yeah, but it's not strong enough to be used in a judicial trial.
Right. Which is Which is another place this may go in the future, right? That this start.
Let's hope that one day
that it gets applied in judicial processes, right? Yeah. Okay. So do you think you'll make it to 2023 and to visit the Les Belles Femmes in Paris?
In Paris, 2032.
32, not 23.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I hope, but I'm not so sure. Maybe I'm a little hesitant what has happened to me now. And not only that, I mean, enough is enough. I mean, I've had a rich life. I would say to live just to go to Paris 32 is I can lose it.
Okay.
I can lose it. My friend is sorry when I say that, but if I do, it's okay. If I doesn't, it's also okay. I had a goal when my daughter was born that I should live until she was 10 years old, because that I knew I say if she can live and I can take care of her till she's 10, she is all set and nobody can really hurt her deep down. And now she's 25 and I have 15 extra years. So if I can live another years and see her walk out in a career, I'm satisfied.
No, that's
I'm satisfied. So, but I like life. So if I am feeling the way I'm doing now, except for the prostata, I certainly have nothing against being around. You see, another thing what happens when you get up in the 80s is people around you are dying. They disappear, they get Alzheimer, they get dementia, you can't talk to them, they don't remember things. But I have it close to me, so I see it every day, and it's certainly not fun.
Right.
It's a tragedy. I mean, it's part of life. Life is that way. We are programmed to last for a certain time, and to last until you're 100. I think that's kind of an excess.
Okay.
So I would say it has been fantastic up till now. I'm 79 now, so it's a bit. I was, by the way, born the same day as John Lennon. So Janov, we always laughed about that. He was very much an exaggerated patient of Janov's. Janov used
you were the somewhat better patient, you might say.
I was a much better patient, yes, I was. But I didn't give him as much promotion as John Lennon did. So John Lennon meant a hell of a lot for Janov's promotion. Extreme.
Right, and for those who are unaware, John Lennon was a patient of Arthur Janov, and
but I mean, like Vivian has said later, well, when he went away from us, he went into drugs again. So he wasn't cured in any way.
No. And I think he's just another example of the type of people who unwilling, not ready, don't have the result. Well, in his case, he probably did have the resources, but
I don't think he had the patience to do it.
Yeah. So and where are you now with your primal process? So you had this 10 years where you said you sort of came back to normalcy. Do you still engage in primal processes anymore?
No, less and less. I don't need it. It's like it's fading away. It's there, but it's fading away. I'm so relaxed. I very seldom go into exaggerations, and if I do, it's easy to stop it.
And so how often will you have a primal experience? Like once a week, once a month, once every 6 months, just to give people a sense?
Well, it can happen now and then in my dreams, as I say, a very short, just like especially if I'm dreaming about people who I didn't have a good stay with. I won't want to mention any name, but there is a person in my early life who was wrong for me. And when this person appears in my dreams, it's like I'm getting into a birth pain.
Okay.
It's very short. It's like just an ignition into a primal, nothing more. And I know immediately what it's all about, and it's gone. So right. It's less and less. It took many, many years to realize that this person was wrong for me. It was because I used this person as a defense against my father. And I didn't realize that until 40 years later.
Right. And what I interpret is you saying there, when you say defense against your father, it's like you would rather orient your feelings towards that individual than the potentially the deeper feelings which involve more pain that you might have had for your father.
Exactly. I mean, I used this person to make my father shut up, because I knew he admired that person extremely much. So it was kind of a trophy I didn't really like very much, but I could use it against my father in a very, very, very subtle way.
Mm. Yeah.
That's so life. Once away.
And so what I get from this is, in terms of looking at the conclusion of this process for you, or not the conclusion, but where you got to in this process, is this 2-year intense investment, perhaps another 8 years of slowly coming into some level of normalcy where it's less extreme and you're starting to develop a richer life. And then, right, from that point, from 65 to now you're 79, you've now over that period reached a point where, is it true to say your epilepsy is virtually non-existent? Is that too strong, or?
Yes and no. in a way, it's too strong, but still, I would say epilepsy doesn't worry me. For 55 years, between 20 and 55, it was hunting me like a ghost. Let's say over the last 10 years, the ghost is gone.
Right.
Can you follow me?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a subtle way of saying that maybe the epilepsy is still there, but it doesn't haunt me.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't haunt me, and I'm sure that my birth process made some harm to my brain, which is definite for the rest of my life in a way. I mean, right. If you have got some damage to your brain, it's not sure you can heal. But let's say the damage which influenced my conscience is gone. That if extreme things happens, I mean, I could certainly have an epilepsy, because I have also adjusted my life to live a much more careful life. I'm not doing such a stressful job. I'm not exaggerating any longer. I hardly drink liquor. I don't smoke pot or anything like that. I mean, I don't provoke my system or my which of course also has an influence. I'm eating like a textbook for vegetarian. No, I'm not a vegetarian, but I'm living very healthy life.
Right.
Which of course also has an influence. So if I started misusing myself, maybe I could have an epileptic at certain. But I'm sure I could take care of it and turn it into a primal.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that some of these primal. The interesting thing over the last 20 years, let's say the last 10 years, is I've written a hell of a lot of blogs on I normally follow Janov's blogs and answered him, and you read some of them. I spent my time, that was my time with Primal Therapy, that's my blogging. I'm very often there describing primals I had, because in my blogs. I could see when I started playing the saxophone, I went into something new which really put pressure on me, and I could have dreams about turning into subtle things which we turned into primal.
Yeah.
And that was one of the ways I communicated with art as well.
Yeah. And for anybody listening to this who suffers with epilepsy and they're intrigued by your story, where's the place you point them to? What's the first step that you suggest they take?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, they could read my book, of course. I don't want to say it because I want to sell it, because I didn't write it to sell it. I write it for my own memory, for my own family, so they knew what I've been through. If somebody can get something out of that, that's okay. I've been very careful to give advice to people with epilepsy. There are so many reasons. It can have been allergy. It can have been an infection. It can, an infection on the brain. It can have been a blow to the brain. So many, extremely many things can go wrong. And I remember I have given speeches to the neurologic department of my main hospital with all the neurologists and doctors there. And I mean, I could say they were sweating, all of them, when I gave them a story. And they say, yeah, okay, it's fantastic what we hear say, but we don't have these resources to do these things here. I mean, they have 15 minutes to write the recipe for you and put you into the Mir machine and see if something is physically wrong. I mean, what you are talking about is a treatment over years, months, and decades. How in hell we are helpless? I mean, it's fantastic. We would love to do these things, but neither have we economy or the resources or the training to do all these things. So if that can give you an answer, the response from a group of very wise neurologists and medical doctors when they hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think Art had the same view on this. I mean, at the beginning, he was very eager to do a lot of things with epilepsy, but I told him it's not that easy, and he understood that, and he lowered his promotion for curing epilepsy. He lowered all his promises for curing neurosis. So when the last 5-6 years, he said, well, this is not a 4-month treatment. It's not a 10-year treatment. It's a 40-year treatment. It's a lifelong treatment. So if you once you got in and understand the reason for your pain, you have to live with it.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to your question. What you say to epileptics? Yeah, if they can try to find out and figure out the reason for epilepsy, they should really try that. I spent 20 years thinking about it before I found the primal therapy. I don't think the Primal Institute helped me shit. I mean, the person I trusted was Ortiz and Arthur Janov. Or Arthur Janov's personality, he was an extreme personality. I mean, for 40 years, he never ever said something which could doubt what I was thinking about myself and what I was doing. He always said, "It's all in you, Jan. I can't do anything. I can just support you and listen to what you're saying. If I'm lucky enough, I can help you into the feelings. I can't advise you anything. All the advice are in you." And he lived that. He lived that. And the last blog I wrote to him about primal therapy, and I don't know if you have read it. What was it called? A few words about primal therapy. Then I described what it was all about, and over 40 years. He wrote immediately back to me, say, "That's exactly the way it was, Jan, over 40 years, primal therapy. Thank you for saying it."
Right.
And I told him, I mean, he worked 50 years in a neurotic energy to help people with neurosis.
Yeah, neurotic himself.
Yeah. And he accepted. I told him, I mean, you're neurotic yourself. You came from hell, and you were lucky enough to get that kind of neurosis where you could help others. And he accepted that. I mean, no problem.
Yeah. Okay.
So he, in himself, he wasn't the kind of guru many think he was. I mean, they start groups now, and it's like it's almost a primal Arthur Janov religion, which isn't what he wanted. It wasn't, certainly not art.
No. Okay. Well, it's been a fascinating tour of your life's journey.
Yeah.
I hope for people listening to this, it's given them some insights into what the primal process looks and feels like, what it takes,
And it's all about one thing. I mean, there's another guru coming up and been famous these days, and that's Jordan Peterson. And he often, over and over, says again, there's one thing to everything, and that is truth. You need to search for the truth, aim for the truth, and live for the truth. And that's what primal therapy is all about, I would say.
Right. Fine. The truth will set you free.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Well,
right.
Thank you once again for giving up your time and sharing so honestly.
Thank you for listening to me.
No, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.